My daughter called me on a Tuesday in December and told me not to come for Christmas. "It's just easier this year, Dad," she said. "Preston's family has a lot of important people coming, and it would be awkward to explain you." Explain me like I was a stain on the carpet, like 38 years of mopping floors and fixing furnaces and being the man who raised her was something that needed an apology. I said okay. I said I understood. I hung up the phone in my little kitchen and I sat in the dark for a long time. And 3 days later, on Christmas afternoon, in a mansion full of the important people my daughter didn't want to explain me to, a television was turned on. And every single one of them, my daughter included, watched the evening news, and they saw my face. And the room went so quiet you could have heard a snowflake land, because the old janitor they were too ashamed to seat at their table had a secret. And it was about to become the most famous story in the country. Before I go any further, I want to thank you for being here with me tonight. If this story is already sitting on your chest the way it sits on mine, do me a small favor and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It truly helps these stories find their way to the people who need them. And a gentle word before we begin. Some names and details in this account have been changed and dramatized for storytelling and educational purposes, and any resemblance to real people is coincidental. But the heart of it, the lesson buried in the middle, is as real as an old man's regret. My name is Henry Whitaker. Most folks just call me Mr. Henry. For 38 years, I was the custodian at Lincoln High School in Millbrook. I mopped the floors, I scrubbed the lockers, I fixed the leaky radiators in January and the broken air conditioners in June. I was there before the first bell and long after the last bus pulled away. 3 generations of kids in that town grew up calling me Mr. Henry, and I knew most of their names, and I knew which ones were hungry, and I knew which ones cried in the stairwell where they thought nobody could see. A janitor sees everything, you understand. A janitor is invisible, and being invisible means people forget to hide. I never made much money, custodians don't, but I had a good life. I had my wife Ruth for 49 years, and I had a small house on Sycamore Street that we paid off slow and honest, and I had one daughter, Rachel, who was the light of both our lives. Ruth passed 2 years ago. Went to sleep one night and her heart just quietly stopped, and I woke up beside a woman who wasn't there anymore. 49 years and then a house so silent it rang. After she was gone, I kept the routine we'd built. Coffee at 6, a walk to the diner, the crossword, and a quiet ache that never fully went away. Ruth was the smart one. Everyone thought I was just a simple man with a mop, and I let them think it, because that's easier than explaining. But Ruth, God rest her, Ruth understood something about the world that most people never figure out. And what she understood, and what she made me promise to do, quietly, faithfully, every single month for 50 years, is the reason my face ended up on the evening news on Christmas Day. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about my daughter first. Let me tell you how the little girl who used to wait for me at the school gate turned into a woman who was ashamed to sit me at her table. Rachel was a wonderful child. I want to say that plainly, because what came later doesn't erase what came before. She used to walk down to the school after her own classes let out and wait for me to finish my shift, and we'd walk home together, and she'd tell me every single thing that happened in her day. She was smart, smarter than her mother and me put together, and we scraped and saved and were so proud when she got into a good college. First in our family. Ruth cried for a week. But somewhere in that college and in the years after, my Rachel learned to be embarrassed of where she came from. It happened slowly, the way these things do. She stopped mentioning that her father was a janitor. Then she started correcting people, facilities manager, she'd say, which I never once called myself. She married a man named Preston from one of those families that has a name for its house and a pew with a plaque on it at the country club. The Colvilles, old money, or the appearance of it, which in that world is the same thing. I'll never forget the first time I met Preston's mother, Vivian Colville. It was at the engagement dinner at the Sterling Country Club, a place I'd only ever seen from the outside. Ruth and I put on our best clothes, and Vivian Colville looked at me across the table and she asked, with a little smile that didn't reach her eyes, "And what is it you do, Henry?" And before I could answer, my own daughter, my Rachel, said quickly, "Dad's retiring soon, it's not important." And I watched my little girl's cheeks go pink with shame of me. And something in my heart cracked, just a hairline, the kind of crack you can live with for years before it finally breaks all the way through. I let it go. For Rachel, I let it go. I have swallowed a great deal in my life, and I told myself this was one more mouthful, but the crack was there, and the Colvilles kept tapping on it. Over the next few years, the distance grew. Sunday dinners became holiday visits. Holiday visits became a rushed hour on Christmas morning before they left for the Colvilles' thing. My grandchildren, Charlie and little Emma, I saw less and less. Charlie is 11 now and he's got Ruth's eyes, and he loves me the uncomplicated way children love, before the world teaches them to rank people. Emma's 7. Every time I saw them it was shorter, more supervised, more managed, as if Rachel were worried I might embarrass them with my cheap shoes and my honest hands. And then, about 6 months before that Christmas, it got worse. Rachel and Preston started coming by the house, being kind in that careful way that makes you nervous, and eventually they got to the point of it. They thought it was time I considered my options. The house on Sycamore was too much for me. Wouldn't I be more comfortable in a nice assisted living facility? There was a modest one out by the highway. They'd help me sell the house. It would be one less thing to worry about. Now I'm 74, not 104. I climb my own stairs. I shovel my own walk. But that wasn't really what it was about, and I knew it. What it was about was that they looked at my little paid-off house and my old truck, and they saw a poor old man who was becoming an inconvenience. A loose end to be tidied up. They assumed that house was everything I had in the world. They assumed I was a burden. They had no idea. And that, friends, is the great mercy and the great tragedy of being underestimated. It breaks your heart. And it gives you the upper hand, which brings me to that Tuesday in December and the phone call that finally broke the crack all the way through. It was Charlie who told me the truth, not Rachel. Rachel gave me the polite version, the "it's just easier this year" version, the "it would be awkward to explain you" version. But 2 hours after Rachel hung up, my phone rang again, and it was my grandson whispering, and I could tell he was hiding in his room. "Grandpa," he said, and his voice was thick with tears. "Grandpa, are you really not coming for Christmas?" "Looks that way, buddy," I said, trying to keep it light. "Your mom's got a lot going on." "That's not why." He was crying now, trying to be quiet about it. I heard them. I heard Grandma Vivian tell Mom that it would look bad to have a janitor at the party when Dad's business partners are there. And Mom didn't even say anything, Grandpa, she just agreed. She said you wouldn't fit in. He took a shaky breath. I told them that was mean, and Dad sent me to my room. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, and I looked out the window at the snow coming down on Sycamore Street, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not rage. Rage is hot and stupid, and it burns you before it burns anyone else. What I felt was cold and clear and very, very steady. The way Ruth used to get right before she made a decision that changed everything. "Charlie," I said, "you listen to me. You are the bravest boy I know. And what you did, standing up for your old grandpa, that took more character than everyone at that party put together. Don't you ever apologize for it." I paused. "And Charlie, don't you worry about your grandpa. Your grandpa is going to be just fine, better than fine. Now go wash your face and be good, and I'll see you real soon. I promise." I hung up and I stood there a long time. And then I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I opened the drawer in Ruth's old writing desk, and I took out a leather folder, and I opened it, and I looked at the numbers Ruth and I had built together over half a century. The secret we'd kept from the whole world, $6,200,000. Let me tell you how a school janitor came to have $6 million in a folder in his dead wife's desk, because it wasn't luck. And it wasn't a lottery, it was Ruth, and it was 50 years of a promise, and it's the most important thing I can teach you tonight. When we got married in 1976, we didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. But Ruth had read a little book, some paperback she got at the library, about a janitor somewhere who'd left a fortune to charity, and everyone was shocked because he'd never made more than modest wages. And Ruth got a fire in her about it. She sat me down at our kitchen table, this pretty young woman I'd married, and she said, "Henry Whitaker, we are never going to be rich in salary, but we are going to be rich in patience. And patience in this country is the only kind of rich that lasts." Her plan was simple, and it was almost impossible to follow, which is why almost nobody does. Every single month, no matter what, we would put a little money away and buy shares of good, boring, solid American companies. Not to sell, not to gamble, to keep, to let them grow and split and grow again for 50 years. $25 a month at first, then 50, then 100. Whatever we could squeeze out after the bills. We drove old cars. We took vacations at the lake, not on airplanes. We clipped coupons. And every month, without fail, Ruth wrote that check, and here's the part I love. I bought shares of the companies whose products I cleaned up after. I'm serious. I'd empty the trash cans in that high school, and I'd see what the kids couldn't get enough of. The soda they drank, the chips they ate, the shoes on their feet, the little computers that started showing up in their backpacks. And I'd go tell Ruth, the kids can't put down this thing, and we'd buy a few shares of the company that made it. My mop was my market research. For 38 years, I had a front row seat to what America's children loved, and I quietly bet on all of it, $25 at a time. We never told a soul, not Rachel, not anyone. Partly because Ruth was private, and partly because she used to say that the moment people think you have money, they stop seeing you and start seeing your wallet. So we lived small and quiet, and the folder in the desk got thicker and thicker, and the number in it climbed past 100,000, then past 1,000,000, then somewhere in the years the kids of Lincoln High grew up and had kids of their own, it climbed past $6 million. And nobody knew, not one living soul, just me and Ruth, and now Ruth was gone. I had never touched it, not a dollar. Because Ruth and I had a plan for it, a plan we talked about on our porch 1,000 summer evenings. We were going to give it away, most of it, to the kids, to the school. Ruth used to say, "Henry, we spent our whole lives around those children. Some of them go home to nothing. When we go, let's make sure a few of them get to go somewhere." We'd meant to set it up together. And then her heart stopped one night, and I was too broken to think about anything for a long, long time. But now, standing in my kitchen with my grandson's tears still in my ear and my daughter's shame still stinging, I looked at that number, and I heard Ruth's voice as clear as if she were standing beside me. "Well, Henry, what are you waiting for?" I called the one man who'd known our secret all along, Saul Abrams, my friend and our advisor for over 40 years. Saul is the only person outside of Ruth who ever knew the truth of that folder. He's a few years older than me, sharp as a tack, and he'd watched that account grow for 4 decades with a kind of quiet wonder. When I called him and told him I was ready to do what Ruth and I always planned, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Henry, it's about time. Ruth's been waiting on you. Come to my office in the morning. Let's build something that'll outlive us both. Now stay with me here, because this is where a quiet old man's heartbreak turned into something that changed a whole town. But first, do me a favor. If you've ever been underestimated, if someone ever looked at your simple life or your calloused hands or your ordinary job and decided you were nothing, type the word invisible in the comments below. I want to know how many of us are out there. And a gentle reminder, this story weaves together dramatized and fictional elements for the purpose of storytelling and reflection. If that's not your cup of tea, I understand completely, and you're welcome to step away. But if you want to see what a janitor's 50-year secret can do, stay right where you are. Saul and I spent 3 weeks putting it together, and I did it all quietly, the way Ruth would have wanted. The way I'd done everything my whole life. Here's what we built. First, I asked Saul to find out something for me. How much money did the families of Millbrook School District owe in unpaid school lunch debt? You may not know this, but when a child's family can't pay for their lunches, that debt piles up, and sometimes those children get a cold cheese sandwich instead of a hot meal, marked out in front of everyone as the kids who couldn't pay. I'd seen it my whole career. I'd seen the shame on those little faces. The number across the whole district was $181,000. I paid every cent of it, wiped it clean. Every child in Millbrook going forward would eat. Second, and this was the big one, we established a scholarship fund, endowed, permanent, meant to give money away forever, $4 million. Any child who graduated from Lincoln High and got into a college or a trade school but couldn't afford it could. Angela Ruiz was a young reporter for the regional news station, and she'd caught wind of the story the way reporters do. A whole district's lunch debt erased overnight, a $4 million scholarship appearing out of nowhere. A new library rising at Lincoln High, funded by a donor who refused, absolutely refused, to be named. In a small town, that's the biggest mystery there is. Who is the secret angel of Millbrook? And Angela Ruiz decided she was going to find out. The school kept my secret. Principal Grace Okoro, God bless that woman, told Angela flat out that the donor wished to remain anonymous, and that was that. Saul kept my secret, I kept my secret, but secrets in a small town are like water, they find the cracks. It was a former student who finally gave me away, a young man named Danny Rivera. Danny had been one of my stairwell kids 20 years back. A troubled boy, angry, headed for trouble, whose father had run off and whose mother worked 3 jobs. I used to let Danny help me after school, mopping the gym, taking out the trash, and we'd talk, and I'd tell him he was worth something even when the whole world was telling him he wasn't. Danny Rivera is a firefighter now, a good man with a family of his own. And when Angela Ruiz went on the news asking the public for any tips about the mystery donor, Danny Rivera put it together, because he knew that library was Mr. Henry's whole heart, and he knew that scholarship was named for Mrs. Whitaker, and he called that news station and he said 4 words. It's the janitor, Mr. Henry. Angela came to my door 2 days before Christmas. I could have turned her away, but she stood on my porch in the cold and she told me that she'd interviewed a dozen people that day, former students, teachers, parents, and that every single one of them had a story about Mr. Henry. About the man who noticed the hungry kids, who fixed the heat in the cold classrooms first, who told a scared, troubled boy he was worth something, and she said, "Mr. Whitaker, I know you want to be invisible." But I think this town needs to see you. I think the whole country needs to see that the richest man in Millbrook was the one everybody walked past. And I don't know why, maybe because I was tired, maybe because Ruth would have wanted the kids to know they were loved, but I let her in. I told her the whole story, Ruth's plan, the 50 years, the mop as market research, all of it. The story ran on Christmas Day, and it did not stay in Millbrook. Now here is where I need you to lean in because this is the moment. This is the reason you clicked on this story. If you believe that the people the world overlooks are often the ones carrying the most, type the words, the richest man, in the comments. I want to see it. And one last note, as always, this account contains dramatized and fictional elements for the purpose of storytelling and reflection. If that isn't for you, no hard feelings at all. But if you want to know what happened in that mansion when the news came on, stay with me. We're finally there. I wasn't at the Colville mansion, of course. I wasn't invited, remember. I was home on Sycamore Street with a small ham and a cup of coffee and a rerun of an old Christmas movie. So what I'm about to tell you, I pieced together afterward, from Charlie, from Rachel, and from more than one person who was in that room. But I've been told it so many times now that I can see it clear as if I'd been standing there. The Colville party was in full swing. 40 guests, the important people, the business partners, Vivian Colville in her element, gliding through her beautiful home. Preston working the room, and my Rachel in a new dress, smiling her careful smile, being exactly the kind of woman she thought she was supposed to be. Ashamed, I imagine, of nothing that evening. Because the embarrassing old janitor was safely tucked away across town, unexplained, uninvited, forgotten. And then someone turned on the news. I'm told it was one of Preston's partners, a man who wanted to catch the score of a game. And the anchor came on, and the anchor said something like, "And now, a Christmas story that's warming hearts across the country tonight. The mystery of the anonymous donor who transformed an entire school district finally solved." And there was footage of the new library, and there was Principal Akora wiping her eyes, and there was Danny Rivera in his firefighter's uniform saying, "That man told me I was worth something when nobody else did." And it turns out he was worth more than all of us combined, and he never said a word. And then my face filled the screen, the old janitor, Mr. Henry, and underneath it the number. $6 million given away by a retired school custodian who lived in a paid-off house on Sycamore Street and drove a 15-year-old truck. I am told that the room went completely silent. I am told that a champagne glass slipped out of someone's hand and shattered on the floor, and nobody even looked at it. I am told that Vivian Colville, who had once asked me with that little smile, "And what is it you do, Henry?" went the color of the tablecloth. And I am told that my daughter Rachel stood frozen in the middle of that beautiful room, in her beautiful dress, in front of all the important people she hadn't wanted to explain me to, and watched her father, the man she'd told not to come, the man she'd agreed was too embarrassing to seat at the table, be called a hero by the entire nation. And little Charlie, my grandson, my brave boy, I'm told he stood up in front of the whole silent room, pointed at the television and said, "That's my grandpa, and you didn't let him come." Out of the mouths of babes. My phone started ringing at 6:40 that evening, and it did not stop for 3 days. Rachel called 11 times that first night. I didn't answer, not out of spite. I just wasn't ready, and I had learned, finally, at 74 years old, that I was allowed to not be ready. When I finally did call her back 2 days after Christmas, she was crying before she even said hello. And I want to be honest with you about that phone call, because it would be easy to tell you I was cold, that I told her off, that I served up the revenge these stories always promise. But that's not what happened, and it's not who Ruth raised me to be. "Dad," she sobbed, "Dad, why didn't you tell me? All these years, why didn't you tell us?" And there it was, why didn't you tell me? Not "I'm sorry," not "I was wrong." The first thing out of her mouth was still about the money, and that told me everything I needed to know about where her heart was, at least in that moment. So I said the truest thing I know. "Rachel," I said gently. "That's the wrong question. The right question isn't why didn't I tell you I had money. The right question is why did it take a television screen to make you want your father at your table?" I let that sit. "You didn't turn me away because I was poor, sweetheart. You turned me away because you thought I was worthless. Those aren't the same thing, and the money doesn't fix it. If anything, it just shines a light on it." Well, she didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't one. I told her I loved her. I will always love her until the day my heart quietly stops like her mother's did. But I also told her the truth. That I had given the money away, all of it, to the children I'd spent my life among, and that there was no fortune coming to her in Preston, and that I truly hoped that once that sank in, she might come to want her father for who he was and not for what he had. I told her the door to my house was always open, but that she'd have to walk through it as a daughter, not an heir, And I set the same boundary with the Colvilles, though they came running now. Oh, how they came running. Vivian Colville, who couldn't be bothered to shake my hand, sent a card. Preston called to invite me golfing. Suddenly the janitor was very explainable indeed. I was polite, I was kind, and I kept my distance. Because a man who is only valued for his wallet is not valued at all, and I had gone 74 years without selling that particular piece of my dignity, and I wasn't about to start. Let me tell you how it settled, because I know you want to know. The Ruth Whitaker Scholarship Fund gave out its first 11 scholarships that spring. 11 kids from nothing, headed to college and trade schools, the first in their families, just like Rachel had once been. I got to meet every one of them. I shook every hand, and in each of their faces I saw the stairwell kids, the hungry kids, all the children Ruth and I had watched over for half a century, finally getting to go somewhere. The fund is endowed to last forever. Long after I'm gone, some kid in Millbrook will get a shot at a future, because a janitor bought a few shares of stock in 1978. Ruth was right. Patience is the only kind of rich that lasts. The new library opened in the fall, the Ruth Whitaker Library, bright and warm with that wall of windows she'd have loved. I go there sometimes and sit in the corner and watch the kids read, and I talk to my wife a little, quiet so nobody hears. I tell her we did good. I tell her the kids have computers now. I tell her I miss her every single day. The school lunch debt stayed paid. No child in Millbrook eats a cold cheese sandwich of shame anymore. That one of all of it might be my favorite. Angela Ruiz, that young reporter, won an award for the story. She sends me a card every Christmas now. And Danny Rivera, the firefighter who gave me away, he comes by the house once a month and we drink coffee, and I tell him all over again that he was always worth something. Some lessons a person needs to hear more than once. And Rachel, my Rachel, it's been slow, it's been real. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen because of a phone call or a grand gesture. It happened because of Charlie. My grandson kept coming to see me every week with or without his mother's blessing, and eventually Rachel started driving him, and eventually she started coming inside, and eventually she started sitting at my kitchen table just to sit, with nothing to gain and nothing to explain. The first time she came and didn't mention the money, didn't mention the Colvilles, just sat and drank coffee and cried a little, and told me she was sorry, truly sorry. That was the day I got my daughter back. Not all the way. That kind of thing takes years, but the door opened, and she walked through it as a daughter. She left Preston about a year later, as it happens. That's her story to tell, not mine. But I'll say only that a woman who spends long enough sitting at an honest kitchen table sometimes remembers what honest feels like, and stops being able to breathe in rooms that aren't. So here's what I want to leave you with tonight, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from. I spent my whole life being invisible, the man with the mop, the one everybody walked past. And for most of my life I didn't mind, because Ruth saw me, and that was enough. But when my own daughter looked at me and saw nothing worth explaining, it broke something in me that all the money in that folder couldn't fix. Because here is the truth that the Colvilles of the world will never understand, and that cost my Rachel so much to learn. The worth of a person has nothing to do with their job or their bank account, or whether they belong at your fancy table. My worth was the hungry kids I fed, and the scared kids I comforted, and the 50 years of quiet faithfulness that nobody ever saw. That was always there, whether it was in a folder or not. The money didn't make me valuable. The money just finally made me visible. So if there's someone in your life the world overlooks, an old parent, a quiet neighbor, the man who empties your trash, I am begging you tonight, look at them. Really look. You have no idea what they're carrying. The richest people I've ever known drove old trucks and had dirt under their nails. And the poorest people I've ever known lived in mansions and couldn't figure out why they were so empty. And if you're the one who feels invisible tonight, listening to an old janitor talk in the dark, I want you to hear this most of all. You are not worthless because someone failed to see your worth. Their blindness is not your emptiness. You were made valuable the day you were born, and no one's shame, not even your own child's, can take a single dollar off that price. It was never theirs to set. I believe Ruth is somewhere warm and bright, in a library with a wall of windows, watching the kids read. I believe the good we do quietly follows us farther than we'll ever know, and I believe that in the end, the ones the world walks past are often the ones holding it up. I have to believe that. It's the truest thing this old man ever learned. If this story reached something in you tonight, do me a kindness. Leave a comment and tell me about it. Tell me about someone the world overlooked who turned out to be the richest soul you knew.